America is in trouble. We've turned our backs on God, forsaken our history, and too easily succumb to tyrannical orders. Our problem seems overwhelming, but the solution is simple. It's time we return to the Lord in strict adherence to the Constitution of the United States.
Welcome to the Constitution Solution, one podcast under God. We're your hosts, Mark DeLuzio and Cristi Tyrone. Now, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to episode 7, Cristi. Cristi Tyrone, Mark DeLuzio here. Episode 7 of the Constitution Solution, one podcast under God. And Cristi, we have done quite a bit of episodes so far. Got a lot more to go. There's so much to talk about with the Constitution, but what do you have up your sleeve today? We're going to talk about what?
Today, we're going to talk about Republic versus democracy. And this is a Words Matters episode because you hear people saying both. Some people say, yeah, we're a constitutional republic. Some people say we're a democracy or we're a democratic republic. And you kind of hear all these different terms thrown around. And so we're going to focus on what do these words really mean and what did our founders actually set up as our form of government and why. I want to start by opening with a quote by James Madison from Federalist Papers number 48, where he said, "Power is of an encroaching nature, and that it ought to be effectually restrained from passing the limits assigned to it." And so that was one of the main focuses on creating our Constitution and our form of government was keeping power in its bounds, because, you know, we just came off of a tyrannical monarchy and wanted to do better for our people. So in that, what's the best form of government to accomplish that goal? And we're going to go over the different types of government that our founders studied to, seek that end. And in that, we'll go deep into what a democracy is and how our founders viewed it, and then what they thought about republicanism and everything that went into building the framework for our current form of government. Long-standing form of government at that.
Well, yeah, the more, you and I have talked about this over the course of time since I've known you, and there are a lot of reasons why our Constitution has lasted as long as it has, and why our country is as great as it is. And you can point to the things like the Second Amendment, and of course that's key. First Amendment, but I really think the whole issue of us being a republic is the differentiator versus a mob rule majority, which is a democracy, as you're going to talk about. And had we not had that, I do believe we wouldn't be here today, or at least in the form that we are today. Although our form today is not good, and I'm going to talk about that on the next episode. But let's continue with this, Cristi. And again, our whole idea with the Constitution Solution is to educate people about some of these things, to make it hopefully fun and easy to learn the Constitution. So we started out with the basics, and we're going to go through. There are so many different topics to talk about, and this is just one of them, but it's a very important one. So I'm going to turn it back over to you. Again, this is episode 7, Cristi. So we got a long way to go. Okay.
We'll never be bored.
Okay.
Okay, so let's look into the forms of government that our founders looked back on, the trial and errors of everything prior, and kind of see what they saw and what helped to shape their view on this matter. So the first one we'll look at is the totalitarian form of government. In that, there's a centralized power, which is usually a czar, an emperor, a sultan, a Caesar, or pharaoh. With that, there are no individual rights or expression. Government has monopoly on the economy, communication, and weapons, which means there's violence to the people, death and destruction abound. It's really horrible for everybody, except for, I guess, those at the top. We see this in the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. We see this in the Caesars of ancient Rome. And then in more modern times, after America was formed, we'll see Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, and Mao, all who were totalitarian dictators and were just horrific to their people in immeasurable ways. And so totalitarianism is a form of government that I'd say mostly nobody likes.
There's always a few winners. And that's the thing about socialism, for example.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, there are winners in socialism, but it won't be you.
Yeah.
That's what I tell people, but
Yep.
anyway, yeah, totalitarian. Yeah, it is very true. It's very true.
Yep. It happened. It's a very common form of government.
That's right.
Another very common one is monarchy. And with that, you have a king or a queen, and their power is hereditary. The hierarchy comes that way. Every once in a while, you have somebody cut somebody's head off and steal the throne or whatnot. But for the most part, it was the firstborn sons and carried on from there. And these have been good and bad throughout history. The best versions have been through the limited monarchy, which with that we see two of the better examples of that would be in ancient Israel. And we see that laid out in Deuteronomy, where God tells the people that you're going to respect, God's law, my law first, and then hold that above yourself and the people. So that way there's something to answer to. And our founders actually learned a lot from that. But then there's also the Magna Carta in England, where it kind of laid out that like the king is not above the law. And so it kind of was an equalizer among the officials and the people. But even with both of those examples, even the best of the leaders who had the best of intention would usually fail to maintain the limits, and it would end up in some kind of totalitarianism, which is, once again, referencing what Madison said there about power as an encroaching nature.
The Magna Carta didn't last long because I think was it King George that said, no, we ain't doing this anymore, right? But
he definitely acted that way.
Well, yeah. And but the thing about the Magna Carta, although well-intentioned, had no controls. And we talked about the three branches of government and the checks and balances that would keep power in control, okay, and not allow one to be corruptible, if you will. Well, the founders knew that man is corruptible, and that's a fundamental fact. So they try to put these checks and balances to prevent that. Although now we have this fourth branch of government, which, by the way, we're going to talk about in episode 8 about the fourth branch of government, which would be another way to say it, 3-letter agencies. So so
kind of leads to the next form of government, the oligarchy.
Yep. Yeah, it sure does.
Which is led by a small centralized group of elites, and we see that with the feudal tribes and aristocracies. And I mean, I'll say that today we kind of see that with the CDC and the WHO, and kind of like these three-letter agencies that you're talking about. So these people who have not been elected in, nobody picked them, nobody really wanted them, and then poof, here they are, and they're trying to tell us what to do. Oligarchy. Then next we have anarchy, where there's no rule of law. The power is in each individual, very much a fittest of the fittest. But we don't really need to go into the details of where that lands. But John Quincy Adams once said that in anarchy, there is no other law than that of the tiger or the shark. So nobody really benefits from anarchy. And even those that do won't benefit for very long. Then we have the theocracy, which is where the leaders are directly influenced by God. There's a total blend of civil and religious law. We see this in ancient Israel and then in many of the countries in the Middle East today. So that's just kind of like a brief outlook at the types of governments that our founders looked at when shaping our current form of government. Then we will go, let's talk more about democracy. So we're going to go give more attention to this one because many Americans, think of our country as a democracy. Actually, a very unfortunate number of people would say that if asked on the street corner. But the word democracy does not appear in any of our founding documents. You don't see it in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Yet you will find it mentioned with scorn in letters and essays by our founders. They did not like it. Before we get into their opinion of it, which is pretty spicy, since this is a Words Matters episode, I'm going to read you guys the definition of democracy out of the 1828 Noah Webster Dictionary.
And by the way, while you're looking for that, Christy, I just want to remind people back in one of the previous episodes, I can't remember which one, we had a Words Matter episode that you led. And the 1828 dictionary is written by Noah Webster because he knew that words would change, the meaning of words would change, and he wanted to memorialize the words that were used to found that were used to found our country by the framers. And if you look at that dictionary, it was actually 50 years after our 1776 almost, right? It was it was half a century later, but he knew that we needed to have some semblance of documentation as to what these words meant. So when we go interpret the Constitution, we can't use words today, even the Bible, right? We have to look at what was meant there at its writing at that time. So I just want to remind people, and I would ask you to go back and listen to that previous episode that we did on Words Matter, because you're going to hear us refer to that episode probably throughout the whole series of things that we do as we move forward. So thanks, Christy.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. So yeah, the Webster 1828 Webster Dictionary is going to be our closest reference point to what was actually meant back then. And even at the 50 years later, Noah was so connected to our founding that it was definitely brand new in his heart every day, I would say. So democracy, it is a government by the people, a form of government in which the supreme power is lodged in the hands of the people collectively, or which the people exercise the power of, in which the people exercise powers of legislation. Such was the government of Athens. So here we have the sovereign and the power of the people by direct majority vote, which is led by the popular sentiment of the day, the week, the year, the month, the minute. It goes completely on the passions of the people. As I was studying on this, I came upon a very raw example, which is when Jesus rode into town on Palm Sunday and everybody applauded him. And he was like a hero that day, welcome, and the palm fronds and the hoorah. And then, a week later, they crucified him. They say much of the same group of people, and they were like, crucify him, give us Barabbas. So just within 1 week's time, the sentiment of the people changed entirely. And so that's just a really strong example of the whims of man.
So what you're saying, Christy, is, just to put it another way, it was mob rule.
Yes.
Where
it's just what we want when we want it.
If 50% of the people plus one say yes, that's law. That's definitely how you got to think about a democracy. It's mob rule.
It absolutely is. And our founders knew that. And through studying the history of Athens and other attempts of this form of government, they found it to be unstable and too fluctuating, unpredictable, where passions and selfishness would prevail. John Adams referenced it as mob rule, and Benjamin Rush called it mobocracy.
He's a smart guy, by the way. Here's a smart guy.
Mobocracy. Add that to the list of types of government. But yeah, so they saw this stuff and how it happened and how unstable and untrustworthy it was. And so here's just a few quotes by our founders about it, what they thought about democracy. James Madison said, democracy is the most vile form of government. That's pretty basic right there. Gets to the point. In a little more detail, then we have another one by James Madison, where he says, democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contentions, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Ooh, that's heavy. We have John Adams again, who says, remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. Next, we have Fisher Ames, who was one of the framers of the Bill of Rights. And he says, a democracy is a volcano which conceals the fiery materials of its own destruction. These will produce an eruption and carry desolation in their way. So that's not a very favorable outlook there, right? And as bad as all of that is, they knew that it would lead, in effect, it would lead to a worse form of government yet, and that is anarchy. That's where it would go. And now I'm going to go ahead and read a quote by John Adams on the natural path of democracy. Democracy will soon degenerate into an anarchy. Such an anarchy that every man will do what is right in his own eyes, and no man's life or property or reputation or liberty will be secure. And every one of these will soon mold itself into a system of subordination of all the moral virtues and intellectual abilities, all the powers of wealth, beauty, wit, and science, to the wanton pleasures of the capricious will and the execrable, abominable cruelty of one or of a very few. It's pretty serious stuff there. And there's all kinds of examples of America's short history where we see forms of democracy kind of rise and fall. But we'll just go ahead and focus right now on the year of 2020 because we lived it, we're there, it's recent. And in that, we saw a cry for democracy in the riots that happened that year in 2020. When you had people taking to the streets, decrying, social justice, and all the while burning buildings, destroying private businesses, breaking into people's homes, harassing people, stealing, looting, just destroying. And when these people were marching around doing these things, they were literally chanting, "This is what democracy looks like." That was their little chant. And it was hideous watching this happen to our country. And we watched a lot of it live and from their own, cameras as they're going around destroying, and seeing the police being forced to stand down and mayors weren't backing them up and councilmen were just like washing their hands of it. Nobody was standing up for the people against this mob crying for democracy. One of my favorite examples here was the Chaz, the autonomous zone that broke out in Seattle. Do you remember when that happened?
Oh yeah. Yep.
We watched live that night when the people, the mob, broke down the police barrier and trampled the police and calling them the most heinous names that they would never repeat. And they took over and they claimed the park, the central area of town, and they barricaded it off. And they started playing music and dancing around. They acted like it was so happy and so fun. And then there was actually news coverage and even senators in Congress saying this was a peaceful thing. And the mayor called it the summer of love. Well, in this summer of love, in a very short stint of time, I don't think it lasted more than 2 weeks, we had people fighting with each other. We had gunshots ring out. One young man was murdered by gunfire in this autonomous zone.
Yeah, a young guy. Yeah.
Yeah, his poor dad. I remember his dad being interviewed and just like this happened. It's over. His son is gone forever because of this mess.
I remember that.
There was at least one woman raped, maybe more. And the people with the mobocracy would not let the police come in to help. And when people were injured and raped and brutalized, there was no one, they wouldn't let the ambulances in, they wouldn't let the fire trucks in. And they tried to plant a garden. They were putting seeds in the park. And then they realized that they needed water, and they were like pouring water bottles on it. And they're like, oh yeah.
Let's not forget that when you said they were protesters, Cristi, let's put the adjective before that word, paid protesters.
Yeah.
Okay, they were paid. They were paid protesters. And it goes back, and I think we might have mentioned this on another podcast. If the rule of law is absent, our republic does not work. You have our businesses, our capitalism, our economy, our nothing works if there's no rule of law. Okay, and that's democracy. I don't know if it was Jefferson that said that. I can't remember who.
Yeah, in a democracy, the rule is the people and their passion, right? And what they want at that moment. And that's just a prime example in very recent history of where that leads and where it goes. And so you have the fittest of the fittest, the strongest, the loudest, the most violent taking charge, where the regular people who just had their businesses and their homes and their families were just complete victims to this destruction and had no one at their back to say, and especially in a place like that where you don't even have, you're not allowed to have firearms, you can't even really protect yourself.
Emotion is the founders understood the nature of man, and emotions are probably the biggest culprit when it comes to a democracy, because
Yeah.
you've got people passing laws on emotions, just like with COVID, where we traded safety for freedom. If we had allowed a democracy to pass the laws they wanted to pass at that time, we probably would still be confined to our homes, right?
Yeah.
Like in Italy, I just had a friend that went to Italy, and she said that during COVID, they were confined to their homes. They had drones outside their homes, and if they left, police would have came in and swept them up. Okay. Oh yeah, no, this is in Italy. Okay, and it's not the most totalitarian place to be. So you know what happened in China, right? So when you look at all of this, emotion is very dangerous, and I sort of like look at the Hall of Fame in baseball. You have to wait 5 years. Why?
Oh,
Because all the fanfare of that guy, of that player retiring. Let's wait 5 years and let time put this in perspective, not let emotions rule, right? So anyway, I'm just going on and on here, but it's unbelievably, democracy is unbelievably dangerous, and the founders were unbelievable studiers of history, which we don't do today. We are repeating in our country today exactly, economically especially, what has been going on with demises of Greece and England and Japan and all these other countries. We don't study history and don't learn from it. The founders were brilliant in that regard.
and that's even true, like with this super recent history. Like when I was going over this with my daughter Anza, before we recorded, and she said, looking back on what happened with Chaz, because she watched that autonomous zone take place with us, and she said the worst part is that nobody learned from it. Nobody learned from it. There was no punishment. There's no repercussions. The mayor was just like, whatever. I think they did raid her house later on, and showed her the summer of love on her own lawn. But even then, she never backtracked on like, oh, this was a bad idea. Nobody suffered any consequences. There's no law and order. And like she said, the worst thing about it was nobody learned. And that is recent history.
And it's just smart. When protesters, so-called protesters, raid police stations, something's wrong, right?
Yes.
So
And when
anyway,
police aren't allowed to defend the people they're hired to defend.
exactly.
And then so wrapping up this democracy stuff, my husband, Sean, one time when I was telling him about this episode and what I was working on, he said, every day I wake up wondering how I will destroy their democracy to preserve our republic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
I
awesome.
love that. So when they say that they're attacking our democracy, yes, we are.
Yeah, let's keep doing it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into what a republic is now. Let's get to the happy good part.
By the way, I think you missed a quote here that you have on your outline.
Oh.
I love this quote. I think we mentioned it one other time in another podcast. Democracy is 4 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch.
That so sums it
That
up.
says
And that
it
was
right there.
Ambrose Pierce. So that was later. That was a little later in our history.
Yeah.
But it's
I mean,
true
that
to this
says
very
it.
day.
That says it right there. Right.
Mhm.
So anyway.
Yeah. So the poor little lamb doesn't have a thing. He's outnumbered in lunch every time. Okay, so back to the 1828 Webster Dictionary. Let's see what my buddy Webster has to say about a republic. A commonwealth, a state in which the exercise of the sovereign power is lodged in representatives elected by the people. In modern usage, it differs from a democracy or a democratic state in which the people exercise the powers of sovereignty in person. Yet the democracies of Greece are often called republics. So that's kind of probably where that confusion often comes in, where people say like, oh, because I think people think because we vote for our elected officials that that's the democratic aspect of this. Kind of where that confusion comes in. So that pretty much lays out what a republic is. It's where the sovereign power is vested in government officials that are elected by the people. But there are weak republics and strong republics, and there's been different examples. So some of the weak republics would be like a parliamentary system and representative democracies. And in these, the elected representatives are the sovereign power, where though they're elected once they're in, they just kind of get to do what they see right at the time. But a strong republic, like our constitutional republic, is where the representatives are subject to a higher law, in our case, our written constitution. And this is why John Adams said that we are a nation of laws, not of men. So there's something else that our representatives have to answer to other than their current interest or whim. And it's our job as the people to hold them to that. But that system is obviously proven through the fact that we're still here talking with our free speech today, that this works for the people.
I think we said in a prior podcast that, if you look at why has the United States been such a great power economically, militarily, culturally, all kinds of different reasons, right? And you could say, well, is it the people? No, the people came from Europe. Is it the natural resources? Well, there are countries that have as good, if not better, natural resources. And take Mexico, third world country, phenomenal natural resources. Is it the people in government? Absolutely not.
No.
Okay. But it's the Constitution, Cristi. And again, I think the backbone of this Constitution is what you're talking about today. So it's a Constitution that made our country great. And people now
what preserves it.
Well, yeah, and people now are treating the Constitution as a suggestion. And I'm going to talk more about this on progressivism on the next episode with Woodrow Wilson. But I was with a young girl. She was a college student, and she said, well, the Constitution is, it's an old document. And she says, hey, it's kind of like, it's not really, we need to adjust to that, adjust the Constitution. I said, well, yeah, we do have a way to do that. It's called Article 5, which she didn't know anything about. She's a college student. She's learning all this, right?
All these opinions, but no
I said, look, the Constitution, you have to understand something. It's not a suggestion. It's the law. The Constitution is the law. Okay. Now, the speed limit on your highways is the law. You could choose to violate it, but there are consequences. Right now, I don't see any consequences of anybody violating the Constitution.
Well, okay. Especially when all our people, including our educated people, don't even know what's in it. So how are they ever going to stand to protect it?
Exactly.
Why we're doing this show.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay. So let's get on to, let's talk about our constitutional republic and why it's so awesome. So for one, looking back, we see in the Bible, which we know our founders heavily referenced, the Holy Bible is actually the most referenced book in building our Constitution. But in there, we see that God framed his law before he directed the people how to do their government. So the law comes first, the moral law. And our Declaration of Independence references the laws of nature and of nature's God. And so the framers and then our early American clergy often refer to this as the moral law. And in the Declaration, we also see that we were endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men by the consent of the governed. The words in that document just blow my mind every time I repeat them. But so that's what we're looking at as the foundation of our form of government. And through our founding documents and different letters and whatnot by the founders, we will see that they focused on these rights being life, liberty, property, self-defense, religious worship, home security, justice, and law. Those are kind of the things they really focus on protecting and preserving. And those rights are not up for debate. They cannot be voted away. even they might try. We know in our hearts this stuff stands forever, and government cannot take away what God has given. Benjamin Rush once said, "I have always considered Christianity as the strong ground for republicanism." John Adams said, "The Bible is the most Republican book in the world." Noah Webster said, "Our citizens should early understand that the genuine source of Republican principles is in the Bible." So,
By the way, Cristi, can I jump in there for a minute? I just want to make sure
yes,
people understand the word Republican or Republicanism is used in all three of those quotes. We are not
yes,
referring to the Republican Party, which came much later. Okay.
true.
We're talking
Yes.
about a republic when they use that word Republican. And again, this is why words matter. We're talking about a republic when they use these words. Republican, Republican, and all that, not the political party. So that's something really important to understand.
Very great to point that out. Yes, words matter, and that is a big
Exactly.
thing to
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
when going forward. Okay, so let's talk about the history of our republic. So in 1776, when we declared independence, we're shaking the bonds of a tyrannical monarchy. But by that time, we were coming off of 150 years of Christian nation building, right? So you have the Reformation taking place in the 1500s, and man getting a hold of the Bible in print in his own language, in different languages, so people could really embrace the Word of God. And that just changed the history forevermore. And so as the common man was being able to read the Word of God on its own, many of them came to see, and there were certain, teachers of the era that were showing them this and saying, look, God is our king, and he is our head and our leader. And the whole idea of our God-given rights coming first really took root in many different hearts during the Reformation. And so it was that information, that time period, that is the essence that came across, the teaching that came across with the Pilgrims when they settled in the newfound colonies. And so we see in the Mayflower Compact is kind of the first written statements that we'll see on self-government and this attempt to enact that. And so this whole one, people call it the American experiment. This kind of hadn't been done before. So these guys set out across the ocean, risking their very lives, and many of them did die on those first voyages, just for the chance to live their life under their God-given liberty and to give this shot at a republic a chance. And one of the main influencing verses in the Bible that inspired all this, there are many, it's all over, but which is in Exodus 18:21, which we'll often reference as the Hebrew Republic, where it says, "Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of the thousands, rulers of the hundreds, rulers of the 50s, and rulers of the tens." So this shape of a republic, it takes the pressure off of many of the leaders, where you're not, like at that time, Moses was the only one, and everybody was going to him with all their problems and all their judgments, and he couldn't handle the load on his own. So this disperses the load off the rulers. It also kind of leads into that kind of branches of power. So it's not one person that's going to, it's take reign and ruin everybody's lives, as we often seen them do. So in that way, it's really, and it represents the people a lot more clearly. The people have a stronger voice because they are closer to their leaders as they're distributed this way. So republicanism it's right between monarchy and mere democracy. It's like the perfect fit where you kind of get the best of both worlds there. And by 1776, each state had its own constitution. And this was really interesting as I looked into this. And because even with the framework of a republic, they each kind of had tried different things and different tweaks to it to kind of make it work as per what their state was looking at. So like Rhode Island and Connecticut at that time, they never had a royal governor, and then they had, oh, sorry, I lost my place there. Pennsylvania had a single house they had big power, their legislative house. but they had annual elections. So they had a lot of power, but they could vote them in and out really quick. Virginia's House elected the governor and sometimes the judges. Massachusetts and New York, the people elected the governor, who had very high power, but he was also right in there by the people. Maryland had an upper house elections were run by an electoral college, which we'll see in our Constitution later, and we'll do all kinds of study on that. So, and each state had drafted and debated a Bill of Rights, Articles of Confederation. We've talked about that, how it wasn't really enforceable and no one really cared too much about it, but it did promote debate on the powers of government. So by 1787, by the time we start writing our Constitution, the self-government had been proven highly successful in all its different forms in this Republican framework. And by then, cooler heads had gathered, the war is behind us, we're kind of settling into our ways, and we had this knowledgeable ground to stand on to create our United States Constitution.
Cristi, we're going to do an episode on the Federalist Papers, I think, and understand why did the Federalist Papers play a key role in forming that Constitution that was ratified in 1887, along with the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, right? So we will be doing that, and it's very interesting how all this comes together. It's really hard to do any kind of podcast on any one subject without bringing in so many other things that have happened, because it's a big Venn diagram. They're all related. How can you not talk about republicanism, for example, without talking about electoral college? Which is, if I look at the Constitution, and I look at how misinformed America is, and a lot of that has to be placed at the feet of our public school systems, which is why we're doing this podcast, to your point earlier, to help educate people on some of the fundamentals. Church and state, big misunderstanding. You look at the enumerated powers and what really is the role of government, big misunderstanding. And by the way, when I say the American people, I'm talking about our elected officials as well. Okay. The Second Amendment, big misunderstanding. First Amendment, big misunderstanding of what that's about. And the other one is electoral college. People, it's so easy to say to somebody emotionally charged who didn't get their way in an election, hey, the majority should elect our officials. Okay. No. And the electoral college is actually probably one of the more genius things the founders did. And it really is the backbone of what makes us a republic. And you get right down to it. And
Yes.
and so matter of fact, we've had Republican, and I mean the party this time, elected people running for high office here who at one time in their career wanted to get rid of electoral college and go to a majority. Okay, these are people who are out there putting their hat in the ring, running for office. Okay, Newsom in California wants to do this. A couple other states wanted to do this. So the electoral college, to me, is genius. Okay. And we will do
till we get into that episode, because there's
right.
so much.
We will do that. Yeah, there's so much to talk about, Cristi. You and I are going to be married forever. And there's just so much to talk about, and it's a lot of fun too. So Cristi, I know you know this. When they ratified the Constitution in 1887, Ben Franklin, who to me is one of the more fascinating people ever in our history, along with Thomas Jefferson. Franklin was leaving the state house in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, and a woman came up to him and said, "What did you give us, Mr. Franklin?" He says, "A republic, if you can keep it." Okay.
Man.
And I think it was Jefferson that said and I'm going to paraphrase, but the freedom needs to be refreshed with the blood of Americans, of patriots, from time to time.
Patriots and tyrants from time to
Right,
time.
right. And what he means is that we have to continue to fight to keep this republic.
We do. And I believe it was Jefferson also that said the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, right? Like we have to be constantly on our feet.
And we're
fighting
not.
for it.
We're not informed. we're we have probably more information at our fingertips today than ever in the history of mankind. We're probably the least informed as a people. Isn't that ironic, right? So anyway, a republic, if you can keep it. This is why you and I are teaming up to do this, because we want to get people to really understand some of the fundamentals of what this is all about and why it's unique. Okay.
Yes, and why we need to honor it and uphold it, and because the republic form of government is one of the highest forms of government. That's the best way to represent the people. It requires better judgment of voters, empowers the union against the world. But in all that highest form of government, it takes the most responsibility to maintain, right?
Big time.
With great freedom comes great responsibility. And that's why we're studying this stuff, and just as a beginning, like light the spark to kind of get people fired up on knowing knowledge is the key to changing course. And so we see, just on a very simple scale there, that democracy is horrible and dangerous and deadly. Republicanism is man is flawed, so there's always going to be troubles, but it is the best way to represent the people in a manageable manner that's going to overall deliver the best results for mankind. And our long-standing republic is proof of that. To close up here, if you have something else, but
I was going to say, you don't have to be a Harvard law professor to understand the Constitution. Okay, matter of fact,
that's right.
Some of the people that,
I'm not.
Some of the people at that level,
graduated high school.
Sometimes you have to ask yourself, when you hear some of these people who are very educated in this, what book did you read? What Constitution did you read? It's not the one I'm reading, right? So anyway, it's so we'll have more on all this stuff as we move forward. But Cristi, why don't you close it out?
Okay, for the final thing here, I'm going to read a quote by my friend Noah Webster, which really, I think, hits the nail on the head here with the responsibility of a republic. When you become entitled to exercise the right of voting for your public offices, let it be impressed on your mind that God commands you to choose for rulers just men who will rule in the fear of God. The preservation of a republican government depends on the faithful discharge of this duty. If the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. Laws will be made not for the public good so much as for selfish or local purposes. Corrupt or incompetent men will be appointed to execute the laws. The public revenues will be squandered on unworthy men, and the rights of the citizens will be violated or disregarded. If a republican government fails to secure public prosperity and happiness, it must be because the citizens neglect the divine commands and elect bad men to make and administer laws. And here we are.
Amen.
The good news is the key to that is to learn. To learn of faith, knowledge, and courage, which are the headlining thing throughout this podcast. That's what built this country: faith, knowledge, and courage. And we're going to save it. We need the same faith, knowledge, and courage to keep our great republic alive and well for our future generations.
So, Cristi Tyrone, great job. We're going to see you on the next episode. We're going to talk about how our rights are being infringed. Just exactly good. You're a good straight woman. I'm Mark DeLuzio. This was episode 7, Republic versus Democracy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bless.
Thanks for listening to The Constitution Solution, one podcast under God. You can find other episodes on our website at 1787solution.com, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
We're your hosts, Cristi Tyrone and Mark DeLuzio. Until next time, may God bless you and may God bless America.